Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the GSMC Music Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rory O'Toole. As always, we've got a great show for you guys. We're going to be discussing a myriad of topics today. First things first, we're going to get into the new edition of Rolling Stone magazine's 500 Greatest Albums list. After that, we're going to explore the albums that came out September 25th on the last episode. Or actually 2 episodes ago, I detailed the just sheer amount of music that was coming out on September 25th specifically, and the albums that were coming out that day. So we're going to get into all those that came out just at the end of September. Then we're going to have another segment of Skip or Save. That's always fun, before finishing out with my top 10 film soundtracks. So a lot to get to today. A lot to discuss, but first things first. Rolling Stone magazine. They've created another anthology list. If you know anything about Rolling Stone magazine, the counterculture icons that have now become music industry establishments, but they have been the great chroniclers of, mid 20th century onward popular music, especially rock music. And they every now and then come out with these massive lists. The last time this 500 Greatest Albums list came out was 2012, I believe. The first edition was 2003. They've also come out with similar lists like 500 Greatest Songs, 100 Greatest Rock Bands, things like that. And, these lists, they're designed as clickbaity, debate-driven content that is going to create a canon, but also drive conversation and obviously people to buy the magazine, click on the articles, drive traffic. So, it has a very specific purpose as far as just its place within the market of music journalism, but also these are very important, I would say, these are very important anthologies and almost pieces of music history that provide sort of a agreed upon list of what is important, what shaped music, what are the biggest influences, the biggest trailblazers, and just sort of the most important piece of music to the culture at large. So it is both a commercial gambit, but also important when it comes to just detailing music history and sort of cultural criticism and discussion. Now, Rolling Stone said there are 154 new entries in this new list, 86 of which are albums from the 21st century, and 3 times as many hip-hop albums as there were present on the 2003 list. So there is a big difference between the way that 2003 list looked and the 2012 and 2020 lists as time has gone on, and they've gotten new editors, and the younger generations have come into positions of influence here. We've seen more just forms of music and popular culture enter the Rolling Stones list. And it's always been where music listeners, new and old, have turned both to begin discovering music for themselves and to go back and listen to records that they have not gotten a chance to really visit or even have never heard about. So it is important in that respect too, as just like, this is a great introduction to music, and you're definitely going to find something you haven't listened to before, and hopefully find the value in it. The fact that it's on the Rolling Stone 500 list, there's probably something valuable in it. Now, there is a tendency to prioritize music that feels important or influential in some way, even if those judgments don't really say as much about the quality of the music. These music lists run into issues sometimes where sometimes it feels like they want to highlight a album that was really important to the culture at the time, but maybe isn't really listened to that much, or isn't an enjoyable listen as much as another album might be. So that kind of gets into conversations of how important is the music itself versus the music and its relationship with society at large. And only 8 inclusions of electronic music on this list of 500 feels low for a genre with such influence. That's just kind of a side tangential criticism I have. If anything, this list really demonstrates how impossible this task is. Like, I admire that they attempt to make this list, but trying to make 500 greatest albums list is just, not only is it kind of unnecessary and pedantic, but it's just impossible. There's so much music. How do you decide how do you value one album versus another, genres versus each other? It's such an impossible like ordeal. And it's still very canon driven. So the Beatles have 9 albums on the list. Bob Dylan has 8, 7 for Neil Young, 5 for Led Zeppelin, Bruce Springsteen, and Bowie. There's 4 entries for Aretha Franklin, Prince, Radiohead, The Who, Pink Floyd, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Wonder, and the Velvet Underground. But this list overall is much more inclusive, moving towards more artists of color and female artists, which is a good change for a publication and a list that has been a boys club and sort of boomer focused for quite a long time. And you see this in just the difference of placements versus the original list to the list now. So Marvin Gaye's What's Going On is number 1 on the 2020 list. I believe it was number 6 on the 2003 list. And that 2003 list also, I think, was just the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and maybe a Joni Mitchell record in there. And that's certainly changed. Now we have the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds is still number 2. Joni Mitchell's Blue is number 3 now. I think that rose a few spots. Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life is number 4 now. Number 5 is the first Beatles entry, which is Abbey Road. I think Sgt. Pepper's was number 1 on the original list. And Abbey Road is number 5. And Sgt. Pepper's, I think, where does it fall to? It falls to, I think, out of the top 50. So to go from out of the top 50 to number 1 to out of the top 50 is quite the drop. Now, you know what? I'll save the discussion for that in a little bit. Oh no, here it is. It's number 24. It's number 24. But still, fell from number 1 to 24. Shows just the difference already in nearly 20 years between the original list and this new one. Nirvana comes in number 6 with Nevermind. Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, number 7. Purple Rain, number 8 by Prince. Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks at number 9. And Lauryn Hill with the highest hip-hop placement, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill at number 10. And to give you a sense of where other albums are, Michael Jackson's Thriller is number 12. Aretha Franklin, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You is number 13. Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street, number 14. Clash, London Calling, number 16. Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, number 17. Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, number 19. Radiohead, Kid A at number 20. Velvet Underground, The Velvet Underground is number 23. Carole King, Tapestry, number 25. Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the 36 Chambers, 27. Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced, number 30. Miles Davis, Kinda Blue, 31. Beyonce, Lemonade, 32. What else is interesting in this top 50? Talking Heads, Remain in Light, number 39. Number 40, David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust. OK Computer, Radiohead, number 42. Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory, number 43. Nas, Illmatic, 44. Paul Simon, Graceland, number 46. The Ramones, 47. Outkast, Aquemini, number 49. And Jay-Z's The Blueprint at number 50. Now, it's 500 albums in total, but that gives you a sense of what was considered the cream of the crop there in the top 500. And you can just see we have a lot more hip-hop, a lot more female representation, a lot more people of color. Now, you still have the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Michael Jackson, Aretha Franklin, Bruce Springsteen occupying these, really high placements on this Rolling Stone list, but you can see they're trying to make room for new sensibilities and just the changing culture and where we are at as a country in 2020, trying to be sensitive to that. And I guess you could say, hey, Rolling Stone, they're just pandering. They just want to put every Beatles album in the top 20 and Bob Dylan and just call it a day. But I do think there is an earnest reckoning within music criticism, the music publishing industry, and I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, and they realized they needed to update their list for the times, and you can't just focus on rock music and rock music from the 60s through the 80s. Like, you got to expand to hip-hop, you got to expand to R&B, you got to expand to soul music, country, the blues, jazz, reggaeton, pop, just all ton, just incorporate more genres. And I think they try to do that here. I mean, to limited success. It's not a home run, but, I think it's admirable that they made that attempt. There are, interesting questions, though, with this list. I mean, just fundamentally, how do you decide what is an album that is in the 400s versus what's an album in the 200s? It all feels a bit arbitrary, really. How do you delineate that whole thing? Now, they said that they created the list with receiving votes from more than 300 artists, producers, critics, and music industry figures, and tabulated top 50 album lists from all those sources. So, they did try to incorporate various points of view and figures within music and get their input. But still, it's just okay, how do you sift through all that and figure out, okay, what's going to go to 500 and, what's going to go to 4? It feels like you're splitting hairs with the votes there. And then you have questions like, why did Sgt. Pepper's fall so far? I get that they had to make room for other voices and figures, but How is it number one in 2003 and then 24 in 2020? Like, I mean, we can talk about the music itself, but I would just like Rolling Stone to explain that, and it's not really explained. And then just some personal takes. I'd take Highway 61 over Blood on the Tracks as the highest ranking for Dylan albums. I'm also surprised Blonde on Blonde isn't higher on this list. You know, Rolling Stone loves Bob Dylan, and they've done so many features and coverage of the guy. So I'm not saying we needed more there, but I'm just saying, me personally, Blood on the Tracks, it's a great Bob Dylan album, but I think Highway 61 is just a masterpiece. I would take that as my top Bob Dylan album. Amy Winehouse at number 33 is way higher for Back to Black, is way higher than I'd think, but I kind of like that pick. I mean, Amy Winehouse, I think as time has gone on, I mean, at the time we realized this is a great album, but I don't know if anyone said this is a top 50 album of all time. As time's gone on, though, and the enduring greatness of Amy Winehouse, I think that's a good pick. I really like that one. Astral Weeks from Van Morrison, I would have liked to see that in the top 50. I think that was in the top 20 in 2003, and it's completely fallen away. That's a beautiful album. That's a gorgeous, gorgeous album. That should definitely be in the top 50. No James Brown live at the Apollo in the top 50. That seems suspect to me. Harry Styles' Fine Lines being incorporated in this list, I don't understand that. I really don't. And, even if you're a huge Harry Styles fan, we're really going to have a conversation if he's had one of the top 500 greatest albums of all time. That feels like pandering to me. That feels like a ham-fisted attempt at incorporating new pop figures in this canon. But yeah, I don't get that. And I'm not sending shots. I mean, that's a fine album. Harry Styles, it's whatever. But top 500 albums of all time? Really? Harry Styles? That's bizarre to me. Daddy Yankee and Bad Bunny inclusions are great picks. I like that. Recognizing Reggaeton. Jizza's Liquid Swords being in the low 300s seems low to me. Casey Musgraves at 270 is a very pleasant surprise, but I love and adore that album. But man, I did not expect to see Casey Musgraves in this list, but I kind of love it. Led Zeppelin 2 not cracking the top 100 seems odd. Same with the Smiths, The Queen is Dead. I like Take Care by Drake, but no way is that a top 100 of all time. I mean, maybe put it in the 400s, but top 100 album of all time, Take Care? What? That's insane. That's ridiculous. Robert Johnson should be top 50. I mean, I would have liked more blues representation in general, but it's like this guy essentially laid the groundwork for rock music, and ipso facto laid the groundwork for Rolling Stone magazine. And I know music should be important too, but like that's just like that impact alone should put him in the top 50. And just overall takeaways, this really begs the question of whether there is really a big tent where the old classics and the new sounds can coexist. That is what Rolling Stone attempted here, and I don't think it's going to please everyone. It's not really, it's sort of designed to piss off a large contingent of people, but I like the attempt of trying to incorporate all of the important music and varying generations and bring them under one tent to discuss and appreciate and visit and learn about, because I think it's important for all music fans and even young fans like myself to do your homework and understand where music comes from and why it's important. But vice versa, I would think it's important that older generations, don't get stuck in their opinions about music and how their generation had the greatest music ever, and like be open to new music, new artists, new sounds. So it goes both ways, and I think they're trying to, that tension is sort of inherent in this list, and it creates some interesting picks and conversations. And who's to say whether it's successful or not, but I do think it's admirable they made the attempt. And you also have to ask, are albums even that relevant anymore in the age of streaming? Do people listen to albums or do they listen to songs? I think people more so listen to songs and they just piece together disparate songs from disparate artists. They're not looking at like catalogs of I'm gonna listen to every David Bowie album. They're like, no, I'm just gonna listen to the popular ones and maybe some other ones that come up on a Spotify playlist. Like, that's sort of the way people consume music now. So it feels like maybe this conversation isn't even worth having because albums are increasingly irrelevant. That being said, I do still feel like there's a place for the album, and maybe it's unpopular now, but who's to say it won't come back in great importance in the future. Ultimately, these lists should be fluid. What's going on and its thematic structure, where it explores a Vietnam vet coming home to a country at war with itself and his disillusionment with his experience, and essentially asking what's going on. That we're all asking that question right now, so making that the number one album of all time for a 2020 list feels prescient, feels correct. On the other hand, what's going on in 2030? Maybe it's not the number one album of all time. Maybe something else speaks to that moment better, or maybe we should not couch these lists in the current moment and try to judge them in a vacuum. But, that's who's to say if that's even possible. Let me know what you thought of the list. That is the new edition of the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums list. Go give it a read over at rollingstone.com. After the break, we are getting into September 25th album review roundup. Stick around for that.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the show. We just got through a discussion of Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list. And we're going to discuss some more albums. In this case, all the albums that came out on September 25th. I hinted 2 episodes ago that there's going to be a deluge of music, of albums coming out that day. And boy, did that prove to be the case. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Actually, scratch that. 8 albums that came out. We were expecting an album from 2 Chainz out on that day, but he ended up delaying the release of his forthcoming album, So Help Me God, which is the follow-up to his 2019 album, Rap Go to the League. He has already released a single with Lil Wayne called Moneymaker, but yeah, that is delayed. Nonetheless, we got 8 albums in one day, so more than enough music to go around. And overall, I thought it was a really good batch. You got different genres, different sounds, and I don't think there was a terrible album here. Not every album is super memorable or amazing, but I don't think we had an album here that was just a straight dud or anything that I'm gonna pan. I kind of enjoyed all of the music here, and some of it was great and might have album of the year potential, certainly album of the month potential. But yeah, so to start things off, Tim Heidecker, the absurdist comic famous for the Tim and Eric show, he released an album named Fear of Death, and this one is no laughing matter. It's the latest collection of earnest songwriting from the professional funny man, and it's the result of all-star recording sessions featuring Wise Blood, the Lemon Twigs, Jonathan Ratto, and more. It finds Heidecker and Wise Blood's Natalie and Marion duetting over laid-back 70s rock arrangements. It focuses on losing your youth, relevancy, and eventually your life. This all makes it sound much more depressing than the sound actually is, which is up-tempo folk rock that fits somewhere between the Eagles and early Paul McCartney solo work. It's dad rock for existential musings. I quite enjoyed this album, but if you're expecting a funny album because he's a comedian, you're not actually going to get that. It's a real earnest attempt. It's not a joke. It's not some tongue-in-cheek effort. It's a real album. And the dude's got talent. Multifaceted. And yeah, check it out, especially if you're a fan of 70s rock. Sylvan Esso's Free Love also came out. Now, they're the electronic pop duo Amelia Meath and Nick Sanborn, who notched a Grammy nod for their sophomore album that came out in 2017. What Now? This is not quite at a Grammy level, but I think it's a quality project nonetheless. Good. If you're into electronic pop, I'd say it's alternative electronic pop. This is definitely for you. Now, one of the more anticipated albums of this batch, Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension, was released on September 25th. Now, he hasn't been quiet since his last proper album, 2015's Carrie and Lowell. In the time since, he released a collaborative concept album about the solar system alongside James McAllister, Nico Muhly, and the Nationals' Bryce Dessner. Obviously, he contributed to the hugely popular 2017 coming-of-age romantic film Call Me By Your Name, even receiving some Oscar nominations in the process. He also made a New Age-inspired album with his stepfather. But here we are, The Ascension. I believe it's 80 minutes long, so it's definitely on the long end. But it's lush, it's ambitious, like everything he does. It's patient, well-crafted, and has emotional and political reflections, but leaves some room for dancing. If you're going to listen to any song on this album, I would suggest America, which is a symphony of cultural criticism. Really beautiful album, tender but earnest, and really cutting in the best way. A.G. Cook released his album, his second album, I think, of the year. He is the longtime collaborator of Charlie XCX and has worked with other acts like 100 Jacks. He is famous for incorporating disparate genres and sounds, but still with a pop sensibility. And that puts him in extremely rare company. He is sort of a taste maker, a sonic cultivator, if you will. If you like experimental music that's otherwise approachable, this is definitely for you. Roisin Murphy, The Roisin Machine, was released also on September 25th. She is the Irish dance music legend herself. Released her first solo record in 4 years. It's a joint album with legendary Sheffield producer DJ Parrott. Just a great, great disco record. Really makes you miss nightclubs and nights out in this quarantine world that we are still undergoing. Yeah, this made me nostalgic for some nights out. And it's just a great, great record. Something you could put on to lift your spirits, for sure. I would suggest Simulation if you're going to listen to any song off that record. I do like Murphy's Law as well. Incapable is another great, great track off that. But yeah, that might be one of my favorite albums of the moment, honestly. It's great. Public Enemy's What You Gonna Do When the Grid Goes Down. Now, it's not controversial to say Public Enemy's best days are behind them. Clearly, they're not touching their golden era of the late 80s, early 90s. But it's still a well-executed project, and it's just nice to hear the voice of Chuck D at a time like this with all the political chaos we have at the moment. Chuck D, obviously one of the most famous, not only rappers, but just cultural critics and political figures of rap music. So really great to hear his voice and his take on everything right now. State of the Union, which features the DJ Premier beat, is probably the highlight of the album. Other guests include the Beastie Boys' Mike D and Ad Rock, George Clinton, Cypress Hill, and Run DMC. If you are into Golden Age hip-hop, definitely check this record out. Idols, Ultra Mono. This was probably the most anticipated album to come out September 25th, along with Sufjan Stevens' record. This is the third album from the post-punk rock English band who refused to call themselves punk rock. In any event, they play hard-charging, very aggressive rock music. And their previous two albums have been hugely successful and popular due to their combination of aggressive vocals, overwhelming instrumentals, and rowdy energy. This project has already hit the top of the charts in the UK. That being said, I don't think it's as great as their previous two albums, but I think there is plenty to like here, though. Idols has become increasingly polarizing in the rock world, especially in the United Kingdom, where some of their contemporaries have criticized them for essentially virtue signaling and, creating songs that strip the political conversations of all their nuance and cling to lazy narratives like people in villages are more bigoted than people in cities, which, is up for debate, to be honest. But in any event, it continues with the cultural criticisms, political commentary, social value explorations, and as Pitchfork put it, they continue to occupy a peculiar British tradition. Honorary blokes from outside the capital, charismatically proclaiming moral truths in a tone that suggests they could annihilate you in a bar fight. I mean, that is a perfect takeaway there. They do have that sense where they say everything with a lot of conviction and confidence and make you feel like if you disagree, you're going to get beat up. I don't feel like there's any particular standouts on this record, but if you vibe with this sound or if you're a fan of the band, I think you're going to like it. But that being said, not as vibrant as the first two albums. I think that's, unfortunate side effect of it, but you still have a lot of, like I said, a lot of commentary. Songs like Carcinogenic have lyrics like overworking nurses and teachers whilst you preach austerity. Reigns with its electronic squalls and sax barrels along with lyrics like how does it feel to have blue blood coursing through your veins. And so there's just a big sonic rage at the UK, at just the West, just the political realities of the moment. There's one lyric about raising his pink fist to say Black Lives Matter. There's even some contributions from Kenny Beats and some other famous producers from outside the punk sphere. But you wouldn't really notice until you researched it. It's not that like it still sounds mostly like their previous two albums. But yeah, Idols, I think they occupy a really interesting space in music right now because they are at the forefront of the post-punk revival that is really strong in the rock music landscape right now. They do really well at festivals. They have a very passionate fan base, but you've seen some serious backlash as they've become really successful, and part of that is just the UK tradition of they hate anyone who calls for any sort of reform or optimistic attitudes. There's something in British culture that really slaps all that down. And I think there are some valid criticisms about the way they approach their political critiques. Sometimes it is maybe a little lazy or half thought out, but overall, they make really earnest, eager, and powerful music, both sonically and lyrically. And, there's not a lot of acts doing that right now, so gotta respect it. And finally, to round things out here, Deftones' Alms. His first new album since 2016's Gore for the alt-metal band from Sacramento. Their dedication to expanding the boundaries of metal has set them apart from their contemporaries. It's a very mosh-friendly album. Good addition to their catalog. If I'm going to recommend any song from this album, I would say listen to the title track. That is probably the most approachable, has, the most pop-friendly sensibilities on an album that's, it's not really pop-friendly. It's still a metal album, but they do have some catchy songs, and, it's metal it's not overwhelming. It's very approachable. So even if you don't listen to metal that much, Deftones is something you could get into, and I think that title track is a good start. Anyways, those are your albums for September 25th. It was quite the batch we got. And yeah, just takeaways: Roisin Murphy's Roisin Machine, Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension, and yeah, those are probably my top two. Everything else was really good, though, as well. Really good. After the break, we will get into Skip or Save.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the show. We just got through a roundup of the albums that came out September 25th. 8 albums came out that day. A lot of music. We also earlier discussed the Rolling Stones top 500 albums of all time list. And at the end of the show, we're going to get into the top 10 film soundtracks of all time. So please stick around for that. Now, for Skip or Save, I've got two interesting topics here. Now, again, skip or save, just to reiterate, is a activity, a segment, an exercise in which I decide whether I want to skip a topic or save it, like you would on Spotify. Are you going to skip that song or are you going to save it? So if I like something, I save it. If I agree with it, I save it. If I disagree with it, if I don't like it, I skip it. So, was music better in the past? And is any music necessary? Those are my two topics to skip or save. So to start things off, was music better in the past? Now, you hear this a lot, especially from your parents, from your uncles, from your cousins, from anyone who is an elder in your life, maybe even an older brother who's like, maybe 5 to 10 years older than you. But just anyone who's older, typically. I mean, I guess there's some, kids who agree with this, but typically it's going to be older people who say, music now, it's missing any soul, it's missing any poetry, it's missing any great figures or movements compared to the 60s or compared to the 80s or compared to the 90s. It's not the same. You see this in rock, where you have boomer rock fans who say, I'm sorry, but no one is as good a guitarist as Dwayne Allman. I'm sorry, there's no guitarist alive who, in the current day, that could play guitar like Dwayne Allman of the Allman Brothers. It's just not going to happen. Or old head hip-hop fans who say, I'm sorry, but no one is going to touch the lyrical ability, just the flow of Rakim, okay? No one can touch Rakim. No rapper since is on Rakim's level when it comes to his flow, when it comes to his lyrical ability, when it comes to just pure rapping. No one's on Rakim's level. Or soul, no one could be Marvin Gaye. Country, no one could be Johnny Cash. Blah, blah, blah. On and on. Pick any genre. You hear these kind of critiques. And just a general sentiment that music was better in the past. And music now it's crass. It's childish. It's soulless, it's repetitive, yada yada. Pick any criticism you want. That has been leveled at music of present day. And I'm sure that is the way people have felt for eternity. People typically like to crap on current music, current culture, and harken back to days gone by and say, that's when things were right. That's when art was great. That's when music meant something. But I don't buy it. I'm skipping that. Because here is what is the truth, in my opinion. Music was not better in the past. Music has been filtered. And by that I mean all the bad music, all the forgettable, mediocre music that no one remembers because of its inherent poor qualities doesn't get passed down to the generations afterward. The bad music of 1960, the mediocre music of the 1970s, it's not reaching us in 2020. It's been filtered because what we listen to from the past is going to be the cream of the crop. It's going to be the Beatles. It's going to be the Rolling Stones. It's going to be Linda Ronstadt. It's going to be Kate Wolf. These are the figures that are going to pass down. We're not going to hear the failed rock bands, the failed jazz musicians, because no one's trying to keep that alive because it's it's been forgotten for a reason. It was forgotten because it's bad. So essentially what you're doing when you say music was better in the past is you're taking the top 1%, the top 5%, the top 10% of music from all the decades beforehand, or maybe you're zeroing on one decade, maybe from the 80s or the 90s, but let's say all music before this. You're picking the very best, the very, very best, from Bob Dylan to Jay-Z. You're picking all of them, and you're judging it against all the crap that we have to sift through now. So there's a lot of great music being released now, but that's concurrent with all the bad music, the mediocre, the repetitive, the unoriginal, the uncreative. Those all coexist because we haven't had a chance to sift through to allow the meritocracy of music to take over and influence what is remembered, what's championed. And on top of that, familiar music actually feels better to audiences. As Jeff Tweedy of Wilco said in 2011, there's no way you can compete with your early records as they've resonated with people because they have time to seep into people's lives. A new record is immediate, and something immediate will never have the same set of emotions as something that's been able to accumulate emotions over a long period of time. So that's really it too, is not only is it the filter factor, but people associate the music of their youth with memories of happiness, of, young love, of when they were full of optimism and ambition and their whole lives were ahead of them. That's a very memorable time and positive time in people's lives to remember. And now there's, you don't have that time to build that emotional credit into the songs. Maybe you will in the future, but when you just hear something brand new on the radio, it means absolutely nothing to you, and you can dismiss it out of hand. Whereas you can't do the same even with songs that aren't great. Even with songs that you're like, yeah, this is actually bad in numerous ways. It's campy, it's repetitive, whatever. You still might love it because you're like, oh no, that reminds me of this summer camp I had when I was 12 years old, and it's like my favorite time in my life. Or this is the song I danced to at prom. It's not exactly an objective critiques of music. A lot of it is wrapped up in people's personal lives and personal memories. And just remember, there was so much trash in the past, and there is so much greatness now, and it works both ways. There is plenty of trash now. There's plenty of greatness in the past. You always have the yin and yang of music, but to say that music was flat out objectively better in the past is just false and lazy. And really what you're influenced by is your past and the great filter factor here. So I am skipping that. Is any music necessary? Now, there's a piece in the New York Times Magazine from 2018 that discusses this topic in depth. I was thinking about it, reading about this, doing some research, and I stumbled across this piece. And in that piece, they describe and define necessary as in it's necessary to infuse every piece of art with added meaning and political depth, or critique it from such a point of view and decide its greatness or value depending on its contribution in that sense. So is music necessary for humanity and survival? Obviously not. But is music necessary as in or should we judge music based on how necessary it was for the socio-political implications it brought to the table? Now, of course, no work of art, no matter how beautiful, needs to exist, right? I mean, you only get art in a society that has surplus and some level of privilege, because otherwise, if all you're focused on is survival and making it through every day, you're not going to be... No one's playing the flute. No one's playing guitar. There's no music, okay? You only get that when you get some downtime and you get some comfortability, and that's when you get art. That's when you get art. I'm not an anthropologist, but even I recognize that. Now, as we have entered the 2020s, there has been an increasing emphasis on critiquing music, promoting music, and consuming music through this political filter and kind of deciding how important it is, how much we like it based on that. And it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's very much tied up with the internet and online communities. As the New York Times put it, yet the internet, the same force that has increased awareness of social justice movements, has hyperbolized all entries to our fragmented attention spans. It's now as easy to see all the incredible and twisted ways the world causes suffering. The concerned citizen's natural response is to prioritize. It's why so many outlets seem to invoke moral outrage as a growth strategy, and why being told what you need to read out or watch starts to be appealing. So, with the internet, we're seeing more than ever tons of injustices in the world and being exposed to, myriads of problems that need to be addressed politically. And it's just natural that you're going to want to do something about that and seek media that speaks to that dynamic. And you have a lot of websites and publications touting certain pieces of music or art as vital and great. Maybe not because of purely their artistic achievement, but because of what it means for our culture, what that says about income inequality, what it says about racism, what it says about sexism, what it says about, name any contemporary political issue, and you can look at it through that lens. Now, you've always had music that has been outwardly political and outwardly engaged with the outside world. You've had protest music from, the Vietnam era. Obviously, the protest music, the rock music, the folk music of that time was hugely influential. Fela Kuti's music in Nigeria was very subversive and spoke out against the military junta and colonialism. That was very important. Punk sprang up in the United States and the UK and quickly spread throughout the world, was a great youth revolution against conservative governments and backwards ways of thinking and values, and called for radical individualism through collective action. Public Enemy, as they said, they were the black CNN. They approached hip-hop as a way to tell the stories and bring a light to the struggles and environments that many black Americans were living through, especially through the crack epidemic and drug war of the 1980s and 1990s. NWA say the same thing. And even today with artists like Kendrick Lamar, his song All Right is sort of an unofficial anthem for the Black Lives Matter protest. And, you've had figures like the famous author Toni Morrison have quotes like, "All of that art for art's sake stuff is BS. What are these people talking about? All good art is political. There is none that isn't. And the ones that try hard not to be political are political by saying, we love the status quo. We've just dirtied the word politics, made it sound like it's unpatriotic or something." That all started in the period of state art, where you had the communists and fascists running around doing this poster stuff, and the reaction was, no, 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 they're only aesthetics. My point is that it has to be both beautiful and political at the same time. I'm not interested in art that is not in the world. Now, I think that's a valuable position, and a legitimate one, and a legitimate point of view. And I sort of go back and forth on this. But that being said, I think I skip this because I do believe it's important that we take away our current preoccupations and look at art through the artist's sense, through just what the piece of music is, what the painting is, the craft, the structure, the execution. I think that to say that you can't look at art through that way, that it has to be, looked at through this socio-cultural, socio-political lens, that feels just as stifling as saying no art is political. Art, just look at my art for art's sake. Now, I think it should be both. Like, obviously some pieces of art you cannot take away from its political implications, right? You can't take Public Enemy out of, the political policies of the 1980s. They're wrapped up in each other, and they're commentating on all of that. Just like you can't look at the literature of Russian novelists before the revolution and not look at that through the lens of where Russian society was, because those books were very self-consciously writing about Russian society and its relationship with politics. But not all art is trying to do that. Some artists are just woefully ignorant and uninterested in the political moment and just expressing themselves as human beings, trying to say something about the human experience. And so I don't think it's necessary that we imbue every piece of art, and especially criticism of art, with this way of what's necessary. Is it necessary? I just think that's just as stifling as the opposite. And art indeed reflects society on some level, but I don't think it leads it either, except in limited cases. And if that's the case, a lot of times it's only tangential or accidental. And it's important not to overrate artists' importance, but let's not entirely dismiss it either. Some of the times it feels like when we talk about what art is necessary, what music is necessary, we also elevate the artists themselves. Like this album from Beyonce, Lemonade's Beyonce, has huge implications on Black identity politics in America. And like, she definitely brings that to the table, but to elevate her to the position of a thought leader and a just movement organizer of all that seems a bit over the top. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I go back and forth on it. But ultimately, I think, not all art has to be imbued with that socio-political lens. After the break, we will be getting into the top 10 film soundtracks of all time. That is going to be really fun.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
are going to get into the top 10 film soundtracks of all time, according to me. Now, film and music go together like peanut butter and jelly. If you know anything about film history, movies started without any dialogue. And you would go to the movie palace, and there would be no sounds from the film itself. It was silent movies. They were quite animated physically, though, and you could, they'd have little title cards that indicated sometimes what was said or where they were, kind of clue you in, so you could follow it. But more importantly, at these movie palaces, there would be live musical performances from symphonies, from orchestras, who would provide music for different scenes and for just the entire duration of the film. So from the very beginning, music has been integral to the film experience, to punctuating moments, to underscoring tension, underscoring love, essentially communicating what's on screen, what's been said through music. So it's hugely, hugely important, and a great film soundtrack can elevate a good film into a great film, in my opinion. It's that important, and it really says a lot about the movie as well. The choices they make with their music says a lot about the director, the story, the characters, etc. And these are the ones that I think exemplify that to the greatest degree and with the most intention or most success. Now, there will definitely be some disagreements here, and let's be honest, just ranking these is kind of arbitrary, just like the top 500 album list is sort of arbitrary, but, what else do we have to do with our time? So, number 10, to start things off, I'm going to say is the Baby Driver soundtrack. The 2017 film from Edgar Wright framed scenes within the context of each song, with songs from Queen, The Damned, and John Spencer, all fully presented, allowing you to enjoy the full spectacle of a car chase musical. Now, his character in the film, the main character, Baby, is deaf or partly deaf. It's not that he's deaf. He has tinnitus, and to override that, he constantly has music in his ears at all times, specifically from the original iPod. And so you kind of see the world through Baby's eyes in the film, and therefore you hear the music he's listening to as well. It's a really clever way to craft the film. And Edgar Wright, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, the man is fantastic at picking musical soundtracks, and this might be his greatest one, with this attention and this detail. As Consequence of Sound said, this isn't the soundtrack for music nerds, it's the soundtrack that creates music nerds. Absolutely adore this soundtrack, and just great movie in general. Number 9, Saturday Night Fever managed to stay afloat the Billboard charts for 24 straight weeks when it came out, not to mention 18 straight weeks overseas in the UK, making this one of the most successful albums ever, let alone film soundtracks. Now, it's filled with disco hits, and just from the Bee Gees to other disco superstars, it really is a bookmarking of a specific time in America, in American culture. And if you love disco, obviously this is the film for you. And even if you don't love disco, the cuts off this thing are so great that you're going to convert pretty shortly thereafter. Number 8, Goodfellas. obviously Martin Scorsese is a huge music fan. He has done some music documentaries. I actually went to the Castro Theater here in San Francisco where he was doing a special screening of his Bob Dylan documentary, Rolling Thunder Revue, which Martin Scorsese also spoke at. So I was in the same room as Martin Scorsese before all this COVID nonsense happened. But he is fantastic with his music choices, and I think Goodfellas may be the height of that. He has an unrivaled understanding of how sound and vision can be combined to essentially elevate every scene and character motivations. And he is the best thing and my most favorite thing about him, and specifically in this music, is how he uses songs in unexpected ways. Also, when they seem to clash with each other, like he'll use a happy Motown song during like a mob shooting. He uses Donovan's Atlantis for a scene with a beating, or the Crystals' Then He Kissed Me for the most famous tracking shot in film history when Henry and Karen are going through the Copacabana, and it's that famous tracking shot, and that really adds to the glamour of that whole moment. And the music shapes the tone of the film. It really gives you a sense of, when things are good or when things are bad, or, brings home to bear like just the sheer violence or depravity on display sometimes. And thanks to Goodfellas, Lila is the sound of unrequited love and mobster corpses and meat trucks, now and forever. So that's a positive there. The Graduate at number 7. While filming The Graduate, director Mike Nichols received a copy of Simon & Garfunkel's 1966 record, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, and heard what he needed to bring his lost soul characters to life. Nichols' request was met by skepticism from the folk duo. Paul Simon called the source novel Bad Salinger, but in the end, he used 2 songs from Parsley and 2 songs from Sound of Silence, plus a new one from the pair, Mrs. Robinson. Simon & Garfunkel's music deepened the alienation felt by the film's protagonist, Dustin Hoffman, and seemingly everyone else in the film. The Sound of Silence is obviously an iconic song, but also used on multiple occasions to channel generational anxiety and uncertain futures in the film, while Mrs. Robinson, another famous track, serves as an ode to the character in the film. And it's not just Simon and Garfunkel. You have, some contributions from the composer Dave Grusin as well that provide some nice little flourishes. And it really speaks to a film that spoke to a generation and the music that defined it as well. Number 6, Dazed and Confused. Now, this is one of my favorite movies from Richard Linklater. And of course, this is the one that details high school life in Texas in the 1970s. And it really emphasizes not just 70s rock, like, what was actually the best rock, but what teenagers were listening to at the time. Songs like Alice Cooper's School's Out and the Runaways' Cherry Bomb. And you get Ted Nugent, Rick Derringer, and Foghat's Slow Ride becomes sort of the unofficial anthem of that song and of that just piece of time in America. Number 5, Train Spotting. I mean, look at the roster here. You have contributions from Blur, Iggy Pop, New Order, Lou Reed, Primal Scream. And for a movie about heroin addicts in Glasgow, it really has some really jumpy, vibrant music, because this is, yes, it's about heroin addicts, but it's not some, sad public service announcement. It's a character study and really explores the full range of human emotions, and you get that in this film with the music. I mean, the use of Lust for Life by Iggy Pop, I think in the opening when they're running in that chase down scene is like just perfect. Underworld's Born Slippery signals something coming, and Lou Reed's Perfect Day is incorporated very, very timely as well. Number 4, Pulp Fiction. Now, Pitchfork said Quentin Tarantino approached the score of his film the way skillful rap producers approach sampling, digging up and recontextualizing lost gems from the vinyl era, finding a certain crazed intensity in 60s surf rock tunes. I mean, that's a great way of putting it, because Tarantino, all his films have great soundtracks, but Pulp Fiction was just the best version of it, because he finds these, like, no one remembered surf rock really, but he, Quentin Tarantino, being the weirdo that he is, had a weird obsession with surf rock, and he finds a way to incorporate it into his crazy little cinematic universe, and it just works seamlessly. If you've seen Pulp Fiction, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That thing, it's perfect. Number 3, Boogie Nights, the film from Paul Thomas Anderson that chronicles the lives of adult film stars and directors in the San Fernando Valley of the 1970s. You have some just fantastic songs from the disco era, from the 70s. Even though the movie gets dark, you end up wanting to spend time there because it's so vibrant and alive and full of color and life. You have songs like Eric Burdon and War's Spill the Wine, or the Cha-Cha-Cha's Jungle Fever, which, funny enough, was banned from the BBC because it was so naughty. And the use of Sister Christian's Night Ranger, that coming-of-age hair rock anthem recast in the scene of a drug deal gone wrong is very Scorsese-esque, where you have the juxtaposition of a song that's maybe happy or upbeat with, outright violence or, like, high drama. Number 2, Purple Rain, of course, from Prince. This was one of the 10 highest-grossing films of 1984. And watching it still feels like stumbling into Prince's weird dream. There's a lot of iconic tracks on this album. And the fact that it was a kind of a visual album was really, really cool and ahead of its time. And the movie isn't fantastic, but the album is really, really great. So, Purple Rain, you could easily make a case for number 1 as well, but I say number 1 is Superfly by soul superstar Curtis Mayfield, recorded for the blaxploitation film of the same name. And that movie, like Purple Rain, wasn't really that good, but the music, the album, was fantastic. He wrote the album with the screenplay and dailies from the film set in mind, and his music is not just a companion, it's composition as world building. He focuses on the character, Youngblood Priest, a jaded cocaine dealer seeking to exit the game after one last score. And with that in mind, he creates this fantastic story that's at times bittersweet, depressing, but also triumphant and affirming. It is one of the most vibrant and voracious albums of all time, and it feels like it highlights the very best of show business. Just, Curtis Mayfield is an absolute legend, and I mean, this is something you could play in any country at any time, and it's going to get people off their feet feeling good. And it says, like I said, it feels like show business. It feels like entertainment. It feels like the allure of Hollywood and music coming into one, married together. Perfect little sandwich there. Honorable mentions. Friday from Ice Cube. There's, obviously songs from Ice Cube, but also the Isley Brothers, Rick James, Bootsy Collins, Dr. Dre. American Graffiti has a fantastic soundtrack full of doo-wop and 1950s rock and roll. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is a fantastic folk record. T-Bone Burnett does a fantastic job there. Saturday Night Fever, we already talked about that. Drive, just amazing synths there. Do the Right Thing, obviously famous for Public Enemy's Fight the Power, which I think is blasted 15 times in that movie. Kill Bill, another great Tarantino soundtrack. Rushmore, Wes Anderson using the Kinks, Devo, and The Who. Just fantastic. The Bodyguard. This was the best-selling soundtrack of all time. 42 million copies sold worldwide because of Whitney Houston's peerless recording of Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You, which spent 14 consecutive weeks at Billboard's #1 spot. The Belly soundtrack, which is a cliche crime drama directed by the music video director Hype Williams, has some great cuts from Jay-Z, Nas, DMX, D'Angelo, and members of the Wu-Tang Clan. A Fistful of Dollars. I mean, come on. Ennio Morricone, he's a legend. Rest in peace. This is maybe his best work. Good Will Hunting with the Elliott Smith contributions. And then, of course, the scores of The Wizard of Oz, Star Wars, Godfather, all should be considered as well. That is my top 10 list, though, and this is the show. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Music Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please follow us on all the socials. Please leave a review. We really appreciate that. And I'll see you when I see you. Take care, y'all.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.